Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. So when I was making my reading goal for this year, I was reflecting back on my previous reading goals from previous years, and it made me realize how far I've come along since I started picking up reading again. And that happened during, I would say 2020, during the pandemic, but I wasn't really that successful with it. I probably only read like a handful of books during that time. I was still finding it a bit hard to read as a hobby. Then in 2021, that was when I started to really take it more seriously, I guess, or be more intentional about it. And by the end of that year, I read 10 books total, which is honestly like a really huge achievement for me at the time. You know, from that year of 2021 of reading 10 books, fast forward to last year in 2024 with reading 29 books, like that's such a big gap and such a huge thing for me. Like, that's just so cool. And for today's video, so sorry about the long intro. For today's video, I just wanted to share some tips, I guess, or some advice or whatever to help you read more. So these are just things that worked for me. They may work for you or they may not. So just take what you will from this video. So I've got 5 tips to share with you guys, and these are like nothing groundbreaking. I just wanted to share some things that have worked for me, and hopefully these can help you if that is something that you would like to do. If you'd like to read more, I hope these tips can help. And actually, I would like to preface this by saying that reading takes practice. With my experience, it was a bit hard for me in the beginning because it was just not something that I was used to at the time, and then as the more that I kept on reading books, the more comfortable reading became. So these are in no particular order, but the first tip that I've written down is read books you're actually interested in. And these are the books that you find fun, that you find enjoyable to read, you find super interesting, where you're just immersed in the book. That's what I mean by this tip. I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory. Like, of course, why would you read something that you're not really enjoying or you're not really interested in or curious about? Like, you're just gonna be wasting your time. But that was what I did in the beginning. I wasn't really reading books that I was like truly interested in. I was just reading some of the books that I had, even though I wasn't really feeling like reading them. And during that time, I was reading a lot of classics and nonfiction because some of the YouTubers I was watching at the time were reading like these nonfiction books. I mean, I was interested in, but they weren't really like grabbing my attention. So I was like really having a hard time trying to read these books. And eventually I just decided to abandon them or like DNF them. And then at that time, I was more interested in reading fiction books. I used to read a lot when I was a kid, and the books that I enjoyed during that time were fantasy books, mystery books, again, just fiction books in general. Tip number 2 is don't be a book snob, because this is, again, what I did when I first started reading. As I mentioned, I just was reading classics and non-fiction books because those were recommended by the YouTubers that I was watching at that time. I mean, those books are still good, like, there's nothing wrong with those books, but how I was approaching reading at the time was just like, these are the only books that are like good or like that are worth reading. I thought these books are classics for a reason. There's something to learn from these books. They're being taught in schools or whatever. And with nonfiction books, there's like something to learn from in those books. So I was being a bit of a book snob during the beginning of my reading journey, if you will, of getting back into reading. So that wasn't really a fun time. It just made me miserable. So don't be a book snob. Just read whatever you want to read, but don't put down other kinds of books because they're still good. It just may not be your preference or it may not be for you, but don't put those books down. Okay, moving on to tip number 3. Don't be afraid or feel guilty of DNFing or abandoning a book. This was something that I was having a hard time when I was starting to get back into reading because at that time, I don't know why, but for me, I just wanted to just read like one book at a time, and I really wanted to finish all of the books that I was reading. If you're not enjoying a book, it's okay to not continue reading it. You can always just pick it back up again if you wanted to. So if you're not really liking a book, you can just DNF it, or if you want, abandon it completely if you're really not interested in reading it ever again. Because again, they're just books. You can pick them back up if you want to read them again. So don't be afraid to do that, or don't feel guilty of doing that. The next tip is feel free to read more than one book at a time. So in the beginning of my reading journey of getting back into reading, I was just reading one book at a time because I thought if I'm reading one book, I need to pour all my energy and focus into just this one book. However, since I am a mood reader, which just means like I tend to just read books that I'm in the mood for. So if I'm not feeling like reading something at the moment, then I just take a pause on that book and I'll start reading something else. However, I didn't realize that about myself yet during that time. So it was just such a really difficult time, especially when I was reading something that I was just not enjoying, that I found boring. That happened with Call of the Wild, that book. I took so long to finish that book, even though it's so short and like so thin. It took me like a month to finish that book because I just didn't want to read it. And I could have read so many books during that time if I did not just like limit myself to read one book at a time. So yeah, feel free to read more than one book if you want, especially if you are a mood reader like me. It's very, very, very helpful. And then my last tip is to try other mediums for reading. And what I mean by these are your ebooks, audiobooks. I'll also include like graphic novels and web comics on here. And you may surprise yourself that you may actually enjoy reading those kinds of mediums instead of a regular book. And also I found these to be more accessible. With ebooks, you can find a lot of them online for free, as well as audiobooks, especially for classics. And because a lot of the classics are in the public domain, meaning that they're free to the public, they're just easier to find and there's a lot more options with it. Especially for audiobooks, there's a lot more places where you can find them, a lot more different audiobooks that you can find as well with different narrators reading these. I'll put a link down below where you can find some free audiobooks to listen to. I mostly just use YouTube, but I'll also use this other site to find some audiobooks that I'm looking for that's not necessarily available on YouTube. Again, with ebooks, you can just search them up online and see if there's any free version available. And yeah, I just really like the accessibility of these other mediums. So yeah, those are all of my tips that I wanted to share with you guys. And these are the things that helped me be able to read more through the years. So I hope some of these tips are helpful. Let me know in the comments below. Again, feel free to check out the site that I have linked in the description. That is going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!